my name is Rachel. I am the, I guess, world builder for Amnesty, along with my partner Rob, who handles things much more on like a logistics and rules side of thing. But I am the, I guess, the major player as far as world building, the world lore, the culture, and stuff like that.
Can you tell me about some more of your history participating in LARPs, either as a creator or as a player?
Amnesty is actually my first time as a LARP creator on staff side. My first time LARPing at all was way back in 2016. I've struggled with anxiety and depression my whole life, but I was in the middle of a particularly bad swing at that time. I had recently been diagnosed with social phobia, and I was self isolating more and more. But an old friend of mine invited me to go to this LARP thing, whatever that was. um, the event was called Lands of Exile, which I think you've heard of.
Yeah.
And to no one's greater surprise than my own, I ended up going. My mom offered to come and get me in the middle of the night if I needed her to. I'll be honest, I did not have a great time that first event, but I was curious enough to give it another try, and I was hooked. I eventually ended up spreading out to other styles of games, other genres. I've done a lot more traveling for LARP than I ever expected I would. LARP was really like a miracle therapy for me. It gave me like a context to socialize in. It gave me something to look forward to consistently, and it's also been a great outlet for my creative energies. It seems a bit dramatic and cliche to say it, but I really do think that LARPing and the friend who invited me saved my life.
I can completely relate, but my story is for another time, but it is somewhat similar to yours.
I honestly, I hear stories like mine a lot.
So you described the origins of Amnesty as an idle thought experiment. Can you kind of walk us through that conversation of what started this all?
Honestly, it wasn't really a conversation. It was just like the seed of an idea for a game that I thought might be fun to play. It was pretty early in my time as a LARPer. I'd been to Lands of Exile, and I had also been to Vanguard, which is another North Carolina-based LARP, and they have Nerf combat in their game. So I got to thinking, like, hey, what if I took like the high immersion, low damage calls or no damage calls of Lands of Exile and tried to make that work with Nerf-based combat? That would be fun. Um, and it really just kind of became a way to entertain myself. Um, Kind of just daydreaming, kind of just seeing if I could do it, if I could make those two things work. You know that saying, to bake a cake from scratch, you must first invent the universe. So in order to think through what those kinds of game mechanics might look like, I first had to figure out, okay, what is this game's setting? Why is anyone in this location? Why is everyone fighting monsters with toy guns instead of doing literally anything else? So that became like another like creative outlet for me, experimenting with like genre and theme and what kind of people might live in this world. And I never had any ambitions for it to turn into an actual game. It was just something fun for me to think about. The conversation that kind of triggered putting this into like the real world instead of just my own personal brain space. I was on a road trip with Rob, and he asked like a conversation starter, "What is your dream LARP?" I didn't really have an answer for that because I don't really know what that would look like, but I did end up telling him about the ideas I had for Amnesty. Rob is he's very enthusiastic about game philosophy, rules systems. He just loves analyzing and creating gameplay systems. But then eventually we were chatting with Emil about it just casually. That's Emil of King Heron Productions, who also runs Lands of Exile now. Uh, and they got really excited about the idea, and asked if they could run the game for us. So that's kind of that's where it all took off.
Did you take any inspiration from media or real life to create a game that's meant to scare its players?
Southern Gothic genre is the single biggest like thematic uh, vibes inspiration for Amnesty. It's kind of a tricky genre. There really are not a whole lot of super popular media uh, that really embody the Southern Gothic genre. A big inspiration to me was actually country music artists like Jason Isbell and Delta Ray, who kind of they embrace the energy and the sound of country music, but they use it to approach much darker themes and tones than you typically see in country music, or at least what gets popular on the radio. Other media would include Edgar Allan Poe is probably the most famous Southern Gothic writer, but a big inspiration for me is also Toni Morrison, who wrote Beloved and Sula. I also looked to a lot of 1800s American history for setting, style, uh, visual aspects of the game, as well as Victorian England. So American folklore, particularly folklore of the South and the Midwest, that is a major inspiration for the kind of like characters and creatures that inhabit the world.
I honestly hadn't thought about like taking inspiration from music before.
It, yeah, it's weird, but I listen to music a lot when I have like 70 different playlists for different like just vibes, feelings
Yeah.
that headspaces I want to get into. And I so yeah, my Southern Gothic playlist was a big inspiration, honestly.
So, in creating a high immersion game that employs Nerf combat mechanics, what did you have to consider in the balance between reality and functionality?
There's always going to be a certain amount of suspension of disbelief. We thought very briefly about using like those cap guns that, make the crack noise. However, we immediately realized, okay, that's going to put a much higher like entry fee, so to speak, on the game. Also, loud noises are very triggering for a lot of people, and it would be impossible to like uh, keep people safe from that anxiety or panic trigger in a game that relies on that kind of combat. We pretty much accepted right off the bat, it's going to be Nerf. We're just going to have to deal with it. We did start out with like a ground rule, like the Nerf blasters are going to have to be painted in a way that fits the aesthetic, which does a lot to bring you kind of back to a reality-based setting. We also decided that the game was going to be very high lethality. If someone pulls out an iron, someone is about to die. That also really increases that does sort of ground you in the reality of being faced with a deadly weapon, which I feel like doesn't come across in a lot of games.
What can you tell me about creating and testing a rule system for this game?
Rob is going to be a much better resource for that one than I am. I can tell you that the game theory that Rob really falls back on a lot, and what was kind of trained into my brain as we were talking about, how this rule system might work, is that players are always going to behave in the way that the system encourages, whether that encouragement is intentional or not on the designer's part. So, like, we can talk all day long about how we want the game to be cooperative, but if the rules end up passively rewarding antagonistic play, that is what the players are going to end up doing. We really had to consider like every minor change we made to the rules, every skill we added to the game, every like background philosophy rule. How is this going to encourage the players to act? The whole vibe of Amnesty is that there be monsters out there. It's very dangerous. Don't go out there. But if everyone, sticks to that, then everyone just ends up sitting inside the fort all day, and that's no fun. So we needed a mechanic that would encourage or necessitate players to venture out into the world and find all the spooky monsters, which is where the resource gathering system comes into play. How there is a certain number of um, food resources and lumber resources that you need to gather each game in order to keep the town functioning well, or else, bad stuff happens next time.
So is there anything else logistically you had to think about while creating this game?
So we spent a lot of time developing the homesteader archetype in particular. There was a lot of behind the scenes consideration that had to go into forming that character archetype because when I was initially developing that, the goal was to um, specifically appeal to players who have limited mobility. I wanted an archetype that rewarded players who tend to stay in the same place for a while, which led into we have to be very careful about physical accessibility at this game. We need to shop around real good to make sure that this is a campsite that's going to be as accessible as possible.
I did definitely notice a lot of the accessibility of the game. As
Hmm.
a disabled person, I definitely have found my own number of struggles at LARPs, and those struggles will never end, but it's definitely obvious whenever a LARP doesn't care versus when they do, and it was very obvious that you put that in there. Like, it was just very obvious that, like, if there was something you weren't comfortable doing or that perhaps you weren't able to participate in, that plot was always on your side, trying to find a way for you to have fun and find a way for you to participate. And I really personally appreciate that. So thank you.
I'm so glad to hear that, and oh, thank you. I'm just so glad that it was good for you. Oh, don't no, I did my mascara. Don't make me cry.
What a mood. In this game, I saw something that I haven't personally experienced in other LARPs, directed cast. What can you
Mhm.
tell me about the functionality of that and its place in your game?
Direct cast honestly serve a lot of roles. They're part full-time NPC, part rules marshal, and they are also technically player characters because they do have a recurring character that they play who grows between games like the player characters do. And they're not privy to everything that goes on behind the scenes. The purpose of the directed cast is to encourage collaborative storytelling, enforce the game's rules and philosophy, and advise players and characters on world lore when it's appropriate. Player characters might have questions about how the town of Amnesty runs, and the directed cast is there to be able to fill in that lore. So in addition to like the storytelling aspect, we also assist with some behind the scenes logistics, like keeping tabs on characters' actions in order to facilitate future stories. We also communicate with ops, keep them apprised of, the flow of the game and any problems that we're running into. Uh, so we all share those responsibilities, but we also have individual roles that are specific to our characters. For example, Justin playing Father Samuel, the priest turned bartender, he also he handles like item exchange and tags and stuff at his in-game saloon. Constable's major role is to keep unfun character versus character gameplay to a minimum. So like there are in-game consequences for if you're being a bit of an in-game jerk.
You mean the first night where I got put in handcuffs? The person that I got in a little in-game spat with, I actually drove to the event with, so we had talked about
Uh-huh.
being at odds. I know some people were like, oh, are they actually mad at each other? But afterwards, we laughed all night long about that. She joked about putting me
I
in handcuffs again, and can I just say, the father makes a good margarita.
Oh my god, that was the best fake margarita I've ever had.
Right.
Oh,
I
no, I was initially like worried that oh shit, we've got a character down already, and oh, it's those two. Okay, no, it's fine.
Yeah, it was
They got
definitely a
this. It's fine.
surprise. Once again, I appreciate the very open connection for consent, where the sheriff walked up behind me and he was like, you're under arrest, but then quickly out of play kind of whispered in my ear, are you okay with me putting you in handcuffs? And I quickly was like, yes, do what you gotta do. And I guess he could tell that I was that kind of role player where I like intense
Hmm.
scenes. I like people just rolling with it and being dramatic. So he quite literally dragged me across the floor. And it was
Yeah, that sounds like
hilarious
something you
and
would do.
fun. And I really appreciate how committed even the directed cast was to not only keeping with what was prepared by plot for them to do, but also making sure that the players had a good time and that the players were consenting to touch-on-touch roleplay.
We want the game to be fun, basically at all times. We're never going to ultimately reach that because I don't think it's possible, but we do, like, even when your character is in trouble with the constable, we want that to be a fun storytelling experience. That's also a big part of the inspiration for the style of the resurrection scenes. When your character dies, we want that to be fun. We want that to be interesting. We don't just want people like lying on the ground for 15 minutes waiting for someone to happen upon their corpse.
Can you tell me about some of the future plans for Amnesty?
I just want to get through the second game, man. I'll be honest, I don't really have concrete plans for the game that far out. I kind of try to take it, okay, one event at a time, one day at a time, one scene at a time. Um, like obviously I have ambitions for it. I want it to grow to a certain extent. I want to uh, I don't know, grow the player base. Which would, honestly give us more NPCs to work with. If we have more players, we have more NPCs. We have bigger battles. Uh, we have bigger monsters. I'm really excited to see the way that the game grows that way. But I can say that there are certain story beats, certain plot lines, certain revelations that are pretty far down the line, but I'm very excited to get to those.
If you had to summarize Amnesty as a project or as a game in one sentence, what would it be?
Uh, hmm. Rootin' Tootin' Cowboy Adventures by day, the unrelenting horror of the human soul by night.
I would say that is fairly accurate. Are there any comments you would like to make about Amnesty, or would you like to tell the internet where you can find this game?
Yes, we do have a website. It is amnestylarp.com, and you can find our future event dates, links to our community pages, and information about other King Heron. We'd love to see you there. It's really been a dream come true to like bring this crazy idea to life, and a sandbox is only as fun as the people playing in it. So you guys, players, bring the game to life, and it meant so much to me to see people excited about this thing that I helped create, and just really diving into that setting and having so much fun with it. It's been amazing, and I can't wait to keep doing it.
They really hated when I was a watcher and like contorting on the ground.
I was right there. Did not like that. No, thank you.
It's more fun to traumatize your character.
Okay, yeah, look, you're gonna come for me like this, really? In front of all our friends?
I was like secretly rooting out of play, like, please let her die. Please let her die.